You know, I really like racing games. They're not my absolute favorite genre, but when I'm in the mood, nothing beats the pure dumb fun of an arcade racer. Games like Burnout and Cars, they're chaotic, they're loud, and they're perfect for when you just want to switch your brain off and have a good time. And honestly, they're some of the best games to play with friends because racing games are usually super pick up and play. But there was one racing game that was way more important than most people give it credit for. In fact, I almost never see anyone talk about it. You can barely find any videos about it on YouTube, and yet without this game, the entire racing genre might look completely different today. And that game is Pole Position. Despite being one of the most influential racing games ever made, the franchise is basically dead. There were only 2 games in the series, and while there was a cartoon series, it had almost nothing to do with the actual game. So, what was Pole Position, and why was it such a big deal? Let's dive into it. The original Pole Position came out in 1982 in the arcades. And it was shockingly realistic for the time. Sure, by today's standards, it looks simple. But back then, it was the closest thing anyone had ever seen to a true racing simulation. Heck, this was probably many players' first experience with a 3D game ever, as they were pretty uncommon back then. One of the biggest reasons for the realism was the inclusion of Fuji Speedway, an actual real-world racetrack in Japan. Pole Position was the first racing game ever to feature a real racing circuit, which gave it a level of authenticity that no other game had ever attempted before in the racing genre. The controls also further amplified the realism. You had a 2-speed gearbox with both high and low gears, plus a gas pedal and a brake pedal in the cockpit cabinet. For 1982, this was incredibly advanced, and while I never got a chance to see one of these cabinets, I can imagine it probably felt extremely realistic to someone back in 1982. So, how do you play the game? And is it fun? Well, the core gameplay is actually pretty simple, which is exactly why it works so well. You start with a single lap around Fuji Speedway. Your goal is to finish within the time limit to qualify for the main race. Your qualifying time determines whether you start the race at all and where you enter on the grid. If you pass the qualifying lap, you get to go on to the main race. And the game isn't about finishing in first place like most modern races are, because there's no traditional positions in the race. Once the race begins, you earn points by passing cars and finishing laps with extra time on the clock. The game is more about skill and survival, unlike modern day racers, which are about finishing in first place most of the time. And the controls are also very simple. You have steering, 2 gears, low gear for acceleration and starting, and high gear for top speed. High gear is absolutely horrible for gaining speed, but it's great for keeping it up and giving yourself an extra speed boost. Low gear gives you better acceleration, but has a limit on how fast you can go. And of course, there's the gas and brake pedals, which are very obvious what they do. And that's the general gist of the game. Also, crashing in this game doesn't kill you. If you hit another card, a billboard, or a road sign, your car explodes and respawns. But you don't lose a life. Instead, you lose time because it takes time for your car to respawn. Now, if you want to play pole position today, honestly, the easiest and most fun way to play it is the My Arcade pole position cabinet. It's usually around 40 bucks, and I grabbed mine even cheaper right after Christmas. It is easily the best modern way to play both pole position 1 and 2. And I cannot stress this enough, for something that fits on a desk, it plays shockingly well. I would totally be using it for footage right now if I had any way to record off a mini arcade cabinet, but I don't. So for this video, most of my footage is coming from the Game Boy Advance and PS1 versions, but we'll talk about those ports later. For now, let's get to the earliest ports, those being the Atari ports. The first port of pole position landed on the Atari 2600 in November of 1982, and on the Atari 5200 about a month later. And honestly, the best thing to come out of these ports isn't the games themselves. No, it's the commercials. First, you have this lame-ass commercial.
This is Pole Position, the smash arcade hit from Atari. You're behind the wheel of a Grand Prix racer with all the horsepower you can handle. Maybe even a little too much. Pole Position, Atari's great Grand Prix video game. Now available for the Atari 2600 system and available in December for all Atari home computers. Pole Position from Atari.
Then you have this one that had me rolling on the floor laughing.
Hey!
Yes?
You look like a real jerk.
Well, I am a corporate executive.
He stops exciting things from happening.
So what you doing?
Well, Muffy, Buffy, Biff Jr. and I are going on our Sunday drive.
Oh, no, you're not. You're gonna play pole position!
This ad is absolutely unhinged in the best possible way. If any of you actually saw this on TV back in the day, please tell me. I need to know if anyone else laughed as hard as I did when I first saw it. Anyway, let's start with the Atari 2600 version. And right off the bat, I'll say this. For the 2600, it's actually pretty decent. Yes, I'm emphasizing for the 2600, because that's the only fair way to judge something this ambitious running on hardware that's basically a computing toaster. I'm not covering the home computer ports, by the way. I know nothing about them and I don't have access to them. So maybe they're worse than this version, but I don't know. If any of you guys have ever played any of the home computer versions of Pole Position, let me know in the comments down below. But back on topic, let's start with the positives of the 2600 version. For one, for a 3D racing game on the 2600, it honestly looks way better than you'd expect. The road scaling effects work, the curves in the track are visible, and the game moves at a respectable speed. But the funniest part is the other cars. So the first time I played this, I genuinely had no idea what these little blobs on the road were supposed to be. They don't look like cars, they barely look like objects. It wasn't until I checked the manual that I went, oh, those are cars. Cool, Good to know. Outside of that, the graphics are extremely stripped down, which again is just the reality of the system they're working on. Now let's talk about the controls, because translating pole positions, arcade setup, steering wheel, pedals, shifter into a one-button joystick controller is a choice. But here's how it works. Fire button is your brake. Not pressing the fire button accelerates. Left and right steers the car. And up and down shifts gears. And that's it. It's simple, it's functional, and it could definitely be worse. But it's not exactly the ideal way to play pole position. So, overall, what do I make of this port? Well, for the time, it was a genuinely impressive port. It brought one of the most advanced arcade racers' homes to a system that was never designed for anything like it. But today, there's really no reason to come back to this version unless you're curious or nostalgic. Or doing a video like I'm doing. Next up is the Atari 5200 port. And believe it or not, this is the first time I've ever talked about a 5200 game on this channel. And considering how spectacularly the Atari 5200 failed, that's honestly kind of impressive. Someday I'll do a full video on that disaster of a system, and I'll give you a hint as to why it was a disaster. It had something to do with this wonky controller. Anyway, back to pole position. Right off the bat, the graphics on the 5200 version are leagues better than the 2600 version. Like, way better. Like, it actually looks like pole position now instead of interpretive racing art. The road is way clearer, the cars actually look like cars, and the whole thing feels a lot closer to the arcade original. And here's the wild part. Despite the 5200's reputation for goofy, unreliable controls, pole position actually plays pretty well. You get a gas button, a brake button, and the analog stick, which actually works for a racing game. That alone puts it way ahead of the 2600 version. So yeah, gameplay-wise and graphics-wise and control-wise, this is definitely the better version of the game. And honestly, I did not expect the first 5200 game I ever covered on this channel to be the one I actually had something good to say about. But here we are. After the early Atari ports, most later versions of pole position were generally very close to the arcade original. And you'll see it all over the place in the Namco museum collections. And honestly, there isn't a whole lot to say about these ports because they're all basically the same after the Atari versions. The only real difference between them is that in some versions, Fuji Speedway gets replaced with the Namco circuit due to licensing reasons. Same gameplay, same feel, just a different name on the track. But overall, if you want to play pole position today, just get the My Arcade pole position cabinet. It's cheap, it's accessible, and it plays both games very well. And you can get the game on most modern hardware thanks to all the Namco museum releases. Except for PC. Yeah, for some reason there's no proper PC release of pole position, and I genuinely have no idea why. Namco has re-released this game everywhere else, but the PC just gets left out. Maybe someday Namco will fix that, but for now, if you're on PC, you're out of luck. So, pole position was definitely revolutionary, and it absolutely dominated arcades in 1982, and was actually the highest grossing coin-up arcade cabinet of that year. Naturally, about a year later, Namco released a sequel, or well, something like a sequel. Pole Position 2 is really more of an upgrade to Pole Position than a sequel. Heck, Pole Position arcade cabinets could literally be converted into Pole Position 2 cabinets just by swapping a handful of chips. So yeah, sequel might be a generous word here. But even if it is more of an update, it's a really good one. Pole Position 2 has everything the first game had in it, just with more polish and more content, and more speed. The big addition is the track selection. You still get Fuji Speedway from the first game, but now you also have a test track, Seaside track, and Sequoia Circuit, whatever that means. Some ports do change the names for licensing reasons, but the layouts are basically the same. Gameplay-wise, Pole Position 2 plays almost exactly like the first game. It's just a little faster. And honestly, that's all it needs to be. It is the better game in my opinion, because it takes everything the original did and just does it better. While it's not my favorite racing game of all time, it is still a good time killer. Just load up the My Arcade cabinet and play Pole Position 2 for about 10 minutes is a great way to relieve some stress. What's weird though is despite being the better game, Pole Position 2 doesn't get nearly as many ports as the first one, and I don't know why. It deserves way more attention in my opinion. One thing that I thought was awesome when I was doing research for this video is the fact that Pole Position 2 was actually a pack-in title for the Atari 7800. Yes! This was the game that came with the Atari 7800 when you bought it. Granted, not too many people bought a 7800 back when it came out, but still, I thought that was a cool fun fact. And hey, the 7800 port is actually really good. Next to the My Arcade version, this is my favorite way to play the game. The sound design is fantastic. They put the outdated sound chip that was in the 7800 to really good use. Here, take a listen. And the controls are actually really good. Heck, sometimes I would say they're better than the My Arcade cabinet version. Granted, in the My Arcade cabinet version, when you're going at top speed, you tend to have less control of your car, and that's intentional. It's meant to make the game feel harder. But the 7800 version is way easier because even at top speed, I can control the car almost perfectly because the controls are just that good. So yeah, if you're looking for something to play on your 7800, check out Pole Position 2. It's well worth your time. But after that one port, it basically just disappears until modern releases. It only got one other port in America to home consoles. Sure, there were a few old computer versions, but I don't have access to those. So yeah, I can't review them. But there was one port on the PlayStation with the Namco Museum Volume 3. And after that, the game just went silent until modern day when it got re-released on the Switch and PS4 and 5. And that's the end of the series. Yes, despite the game being one of the most influential games in the racing genre, the series just goes silent after Pole Position 2. Why? I have no idea. Personally, I really like these games, and while I played the second game way more than I played the first game, both of them are just pure arcade dumb fun, and they're both really good games. And I just wanted to give these games some love because I hardly ever see anyone talk about them on YouTube. Like, ever. Like, you look up videos of Pole Position, and you will find almost nothing. So, I thought I would give them some love. So, if you guys have any memories of Pole Position in the arcade, the ports, or the ridiculous ads, anything, drop them in the comments. I would absolutely love to hear from you, and hear about your experiences and memories. Anyway, this is Troy Schultz, the Anti-Gamer Slayer, signing off!